former dean, Dean Joanne.
And so I'm going to say a lot about me because I really want to get into the presentation. It's the afternoon, I'm the first one up after lunch. And so I promise to try to keep within my time. If someone can give me a note when it's 5 minutes. Yeah, Professor Price, will you give me the 5-minute warning to sit right around 20? Okay, so let's get started.
74% of companies cannot show value from AI. The problem is not the technology, it's in the design. This is from rollout to redesign. Get ready.
Okay, let's get started. I had a lot of fun with this. You heard earlier that I work with some AI agents, and my AI agent pushed me to do my own voiceover because last year I had narrators doing my voiceover. So that's the first one that you heard, and there's a couple more throughout, but that's what I think it's all about. It's about the synthesis of what we can do together with the AI. So what is this presentation about? It's about the opportunity cost of using $250 billion in 2024 and not getting the ROI, not getting the value that was expected. And that came out of a BCG study where they reviewed 1,000 C-suite executives in 59 countries. So this is not an issue that's just a U.S. issue or another country issue. It's a global issue. We are not getting the ROI yet. But is money still going into AI? You bet it is. It's not going to stop. The AI genie is not going back in the bottle. So the challenge is, how do we make it more effective? And it's not just the AI itself, the processes itself, but it's the data. Another study said, this one came from Gartner, that 60% of the data is being abandoned because it's not ready yet to go into the AI. So what's the number one problem? And it's not what I say the problem is, it's what other analysts around the world and these large consulting firms are identifying as the problem. The problem is a workflow redesign problem. We continue to try and make the things that we were doing before and just get a system to do it, when what we really should be doing is looking at the work itself and redesigning it so that it works with man and machine and not what man was doing by itself. So, as we look at some of the work, and this work came out of Wharton, and I talked earlier in our workshop about prompting and prompters. If all we do is manufacture prompters, the millions and millions of prompts that are going in the system, they're not going to produce the exact same thing, but our creativity is getting homogenized. So the challenge is not to just have a prompt and ask the AI a question. The problem is, just like the AI can challenge us, to challenge the AI back. To say, okay, this is what you said you see, but this is my additional perspective. I think Dr. Shane said earlier, the co-creation process is not just you, it's not just the machine, it's the synthesis of the two. So where we see this going, and again, this is documented by some of the Wharton faculty, is curators of diverse trajectory. So we're not trying to just have a prompt and like the students just write a paper. That's not what we're seeing. You heard that in the room. They're taking the information. It used to take them hundreds of hours to research, and they have the system to help them. They can concentrate and focus on higher level thought now and better output, better productivity. So that's what we're working for. And we're working for a better use of that $250 billion that we talked about. So in 2024 at this conference, I talked about tech-enabled futures. I actually launched my book. here at the conference. I love this conference here. I do love the conference. I think the only one I missed was when I had major surgery and I couldn't come, and my students literally had the live feed so I could see what was happening. So I also last year delivered a keynote on entrepreneurial leadership. That work had just came out of Babson. It's not just about entrepreneurship, but it's about entrepreneurial leadership in large corporations as well, and also co-intelligence. That work, some of that work came from the West Coast. So I've been dropping pieces of the thought. Today I'm trying to pull it all together. What I talked about in a different keynote was Bridge Capital, and I'm trying today to share with you the insight. And this stuff, we don't suffer from a lack of information. We suffer from trying to figure out what the information is telling us. And so that's what I'm trying to do today. And I had a colleague that said, we don't need another framework. And I said, well, we might not need another framework, but we need to ask better questions to get better solutions so that we are not having the problem of $250 billion that could have gone somewhere else. Going into this, I'm not advocating that. I am just advocating that we find a way to make it more effective. So you don't have to call them frameworks, you can call it whatever you want to, but how do we change the trajectory of what's happening now? And I will tell you also, some of my colleagues who work in some of the larger firms where this is working will say, well, we're seeing some of the large corporations do better. Well, they have vast amount of resources to do better. Whereas earlier we heard some attention needs to be looked at in the small and medium-sized firms. How are they systemically going to use AI to improve their businesses? Okay, so we heard earlier, we talked a little bit about trust, and we talked about it in a different context. But in the way of the Bridge Capital, I mentioned earlier, and I mentioned several places throughout my work, we now have 5 generations in the workforce. They don't all work alike. There is a trust issue from the seniors that the senior cohorts, that's Microsoft's language. The senior cohorts may think that the emerging cohorts, that's the digital natives that we're talking about, don't understand them and want to erase their job. And then the junior cohorts are thinking that the senior folks are not cooperating, and so they can't get their jobs done. So how do you have that communication challenge, that bridge between generation to generation? I just used the front end being the boomers, but then the back end and the alphas are coming on soon. You know, so how you're going to have a workforce that's diverse no matter what you say, and so how do you optimize that diversity? How do you build trust and safety and adoption cohesion? Just because your emerging cohort can adapt technology easily doesn't mean that they understand what they're building. The institutional knowledge in most of these places is with the senior cohorts because they've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they know how to adapt. It's just them communicating that, so within the total organization, they have a situation where the whole workforce, and I haven't gotten to the AI agents yet, the people gotta talk first. If you're focusing on the tools first, you're focusing on the wrong problem. It's a workforce issue first. How do you take the workforce you have and build the workforce that you need? That is the challenge that we're facing. And so in Bridge Capital, we talk in practice. There are differences. Who holds the judgment? Typically, it's the senior cohorts who've been around and understand. Who holds fluency? Typically, it's the emerging cohorts who are the digital natives. We saw an example of that today when there was an issue, and Deb's daughter came right in, boom, 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 and then she was out again. Who holds the authority? Who decides how much money is going to be allocated for the workforce and for the systems? Typically, those are different level folks. Okay. And are they something going on. And are they working together? Just because all five of the generations are in the workforce together, how are we ensuring that work is getting done? Okay, back to my slides.
You have to remove pin. Remove pin. Did you pin it? Remove pin. Remove pin over there. Here it is. Just remove.
Learning is very important in each generation, but it's also important in the organization that we learn how to do it together. Okay. Okay. Now it's not moving. I need to move to the next slide. Okay, good. Okay, no, I got it. Yeah, that's. We're here, where we trust each other, right? That's a big issue. A big issue in academic institutions, a big issue in industry, corporation. Trust creates the condition, but trust alone is not the strategy. And I have another little video. Okay. Okay.
Bridge Capital tells us what must exist before AI adoption can move. Trust, reciprocal credibility, knowledge flowing across generations. But trust alone is not the strategy. Once the bridge is built, leaders face a harder question. What exactly are we redesigning?
And that is why we call from roll out to redesign. It's because it's not just taking the work as it was done in the past. We are not going to, I mentioned earlier, the org charts are changing in some of these corporations where they have the function that used to be done by the human being done by the agent, and it is called a call out in the org chart. So, when I talk about tech-enabled futures for our students, for our colleagues, for the way we are looking at how work will be, it is not how work we've known it. It is a redesign of which tasks should be augmented, resequenced, or kept human-led. Not every task is going to be given to the AI. So we also have to have a readiness assessment. And it's not just if our workforce is ready, but do we have the systems? I talked earlier about data. Is the data ready? Do we have a readiness question that we've answered? And if we're not ready, what is the plan to get ready? And governance clarity. We talked about this a lot earlier. Who decides where AI is appropriate, constrained, and how accountability is maintained? Governance cannot. I'll just give you an example of Anthropic. A couple of weeks ago, had a big leak. Now, no doubt that there was policy written such that that shouldn't happen. But the issue and the challenge is those who write the policies are not the ones who do the execution. And it's those who do the execution. Are we reviewing those policies? Are we monitoring them? How are we protecting ourselves from the risk? And the reason it was so important for Anthropic is this new version that they're coming out with is supposed to have a lot of cybersecurity into it. So if that version gets into the wrong hands, then the darker elements will have access to how to get around the cybersecurity that was built intentionally because there are a lot of cybersecurity challenges in a lot of the AI as we know it. And then fluency development. If you got 5 different generations, you can't assume that everyone who's just coming out of college is fluent. at the same level. Nor can you determine that everyone who's a boomer doesn't have any knowledge of AI. I'm an example. I love it. I'm on like 4 or 5 different, no, more than that, 6 or 7 different platforms. I have agents on at least 3 or 4 platforms, and I am clearly in that range. So you can't assume that just because I'm a boomer, I don't have knowledge. I may not have as much knowledge as some of the digital natives, but I got some. Okay, but we want to make sure that it goes across generations and it's not in one area. And so I put together an AI fluency scorecard. You can take it if you wish, or you can leave it as you wish, but it's my way to organize thought about what is happening in the literature and what my colleagues in corporate and government is telling me. So first is AI is not a tech problem. When people say, well, we'll bring in the technology, and they haven't said that we've looked at the workforce and we've looked at our processes. If they are bringing in the technology first, if they're rolling out technology first and haven't done the redesign or asked the hard questions, there's going to be an adoption gap. And I'll talk more about the adoption gaps. So I've talked a little bit about data readiness, manager confidence. Do we believe that the managers who are put in charge of doing something that has never been done before, as man-and-machine systems, do they have the confidence to do the job, the task that they have been given? And governance clarity, we talked a lot about that earlier. Learning transfer, just because the emerging cohort understands the tools doesn't mean they understand the business. And if we understand the business and we don't have the tools, we will have an adoption problem, because somewhere in that flow is a break. And then cross-generational spread. How have we gotten our multiple generations who are in our organizations to be able to converse with each other and to work with each other and to work with systems? Okay, so I talked a lot about this. Yes, I got my 5 minutes. I'm about to speed up. Okay, I talked a lot about this in previous conferences here. Collaborate, communicate, and cultivate. Collaborate on the redesign of work, communicate between each other, and cultivate the work with the systems. I'm not going to spend time. So, equity has come up several times here. And this is important. When we do the redesigns, who gets to stay? Who has to leave? Who is going to be developing the next generation? All of these questions are equity kinds of questions and issues. And you heard a couple of the speakers earlier say that the number one sustainable goal is the eradication of poverty. Well, we're not there. But if we continue to leave the low-income earners, as we talked about here earlier, behind, it's going to be worse than it is now. Everywhere, globally. This is not just a one-country problem. Okay, so let me speed up. Collaborative intelligence. I talked a little bit about this last year. I talked about the senior cohorts, the way they can contribute, the emerging cohorts, the way they contribute. But what AI brings to the table is scalability and our ability to have both of those groups work on different problems. So we heard earlier here, in the classroom, the students are using the technology for the research and bringing material to their space. But they're not just stopping there. These young people are bright, many of them. Many of them are very bright, and they're doing the analysis at a different level than they were able before, because they don't have to do some of the grunt work that they had to do. Now they can just focus on the synthesis. What does this mean? How does it work? And those are the kinds of level questions and things we want them to be able to do. And we want to be able to enhance that by being their mentors, their guides. So how can we be a guide if we ourselves are not doing it? I'll give you another industry example. And I won't call the name of the firm, but what they found when thousands and thousands of their employees were working with AI, the rank and staff, they got it. 60% of those who were in staff were able to do the adoption. But guess what? How much percent of leadership do you think was able to do the adoption? Just throw out a 1%. 1%. So yes, the folks who have been mandating that you use these systems because they want to see the productivity gains. So if you are on the floor and you're speaking about the AI that you're experiencing and your leadership team can't relate, you have an adoption gap, okay? So I want to talk about the AI governance as a workforce problem. There's a policy practice gap. We talked about that in Anthropic. There's a decision gap. That was where the executives are making the decisions, but somebody else is doing the work, and that's a decision rights gap. And the leadership adoption gap. I just gave you a real life example. I just didn't mention the company. All right, so the questions to ask, the institutional questions that matter. Where is bridge capital weak in your organization? Which workflow must be redesigned first? I'm trying to tackle the whole thing as I said earlier. Look at what is going to give you the greatest impact and redesign that first. And are we building collaborative intelligence or are we simply using a tool? You say, you brought in ChatGPT, well, how is it being used? Is it just being used to do prompts? Or is it being used to elevate the thinking and the work that the organization is doing? So this is my last one. Let me see if I can get this.
At Stillman College in Alabama, a partnership with Mozilla's Responsible Computing Challenge is demonstrating what these frameworks look like in practice. Bridge capital, built into the partnership structure, tech-enable futures, embedded in the curriculum redesigns, collaborative intelligence, enabling campus-wide adoption. This is an HBCU leading in AI readiness, not following, but leading.
Okay, so I hope that Dr. Dee McCoy is still on the line. This is what they did. A lot of times we as small institutions are under-resourced. We are not going to get the money that some of the larger Ivy League schools get. We're not going to be supported that, so we have to work smart. What they did was they brought in an organization called BTF Institute. It was that institution that handled the workforce rollout in terms of training of the faculty. And this is what we do a lot of times. Our money comes into our institution, we keep it for ourselves. They didn't do that. That money came in and they actually recruited other HBCU faculty and other faith-based faculty, that's their origin, to participate in scaling up of AI within those institutions. And what happened was, and you say, well, how can that happen? They paid them. They gave them money from the funding to participate, and so therefore it wasn't just learning happening at one institution, it was scaled up throughout the ecosystem, which is how we get greater than just one institution having it. And so what do I have 1 minute or am I over?
We give you 1 minute.
And I got 1 minute, I'm gonna do this in 1 minute. Bridge capital, tech-enabled futures, collaborative intelligence, all three together, and we won't or should not have that $240 billion a year going out the window. We should reinvest it in the communities that we need. So let's bring back some of that money, and I'm done. Administration. He's been a serial entrepreneur. He knows how to work through a systems because one of the grants that we got, State Department, when they came, almost didn't get it, and he had it to come through. So he's not a regular, normal person. I'm just going to say that. So tell the audience here, how did you make it happen at Stillman?
Well, thank you for that, D-Roll. So you actually made a point of how that happened, and so because I span academics and the private sector, but a few years ago I was at a conference that was not around higher ed. It was just a business conference, and CEOs were talking about early adoption of AI, and they mentioned one of the keynote and fireside chat mentioned if companies did not lean into AI, their company would be obsolete in the upcoming years. And so I went back to our campus and said, if companies said that everyone needs to adopt it, every department needs to adopt it, what are we doing to prepare our young people to take jobs in industry that is saying that they need you to understand AI? And our provost and president said, we don't know. We didn't have a plan regulated from an academic standpoint, had not thought about it as a workforce standpoint. And so they charged me with what would be our strategy moving forward. And so once again, understanding academics and the workforce, at the same time, I looked at how do we democratize AI, so not just in a business context, not just in a technical framework, but it was what does it look like for every academic discipline to incorporate the understanding of AI and how they can, from their academic and professional perspective, add value to it, not just from, once again, an adoption or usage standpoint, but a humanitarian and environmental protection standpoint as well. And so that's kind of how we leaned into it. And then just taking the history of a historically black college, looking at social justice. So we wanted to look at AI not once again just as a usage, but we wanted to use our history, our framing, and our foundation of social justice. And so we stood on AI adoption with a social justice lens. And so that's how we started, was how do we get academic disciplines involved with a social justice lens, but using and adapting to AI. And so that's kind of how we started that journey several years ago.
Okay. Any other questions? I know I'm past my time, and I want the next speaker to come up, and if I'm available, I'll be around so you can ask me questions afterwards. Thank you.